Welcome back. We've worked pretty hard on this and it's taken a while to get to this point. Now I'm going to show you a little bonus here, how to render out with ambient occlusion. So what's ambient occlusion rendering? It's a technique for rendering out with a specific shader type that allows us to be able to see the model a little bit better when rendering. It also looks a bit like clay rendering, if you've ever seen that or you're familiar with that. If not, don't worry about it. So instead of just talking about it, let me go ahead and show you what the ambient occlusion is all about. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to turn on the mental ray renderer. Right now, mental ray is not set up as the production renderer in our scene. So what we'll do is we'll go to the main menu item here for rendering. We'll go to the render setup window. F10 is the shortcut for that. And the render setup window, I'm just going to right click and then hit close all. I'm going to go down to the assigned renderer rollout, and you notice that the production renderer right now is the default scanline renderer. That's no good. That's not what we want. So let's click on this little button here on the right, and we can choose a renderer. We're going to choose the mental ray renderer. Hit OK. And now mental ray is loaded up as the currently active production renderer. And if we go ahead and do a test render with Shift Q to do that, this is what we get. This is the mental ray render window here, and we have mental ray specific render settings down here in these controls. Final gather is an indirect illumination algorithm that's on by default. We're going to turn it off because we don't need it for ambient occlusion. We're going to take the slider all the way to the left until it says final gather disabled. Okay? And then we're going to close that. Next thing we're going to do is we need to go ahead and fix some of this geometry and do some little tweaks here before we get going. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to unhide by name. I'm going to grab the skylight original object here and unhide it. And basically it's the window panes up here of the skylight. The polygons are facing the wrong way right now, so I'll select all the polygons, go to the quad menu and flip the normals. That way the polygons are facing toward the inside of the house like this. So it renders out properly without any type of weird quirks or anything like that. Okay, so now with that done, I'm going to look at my items here. And if we come over here to the TV, you're going to notice that the little Sony logo down here has a few problems with it. If I go ahead and select the elements, you'll notice that there's some problems. There's some triangulation issues, and these geometry problems were caused when we exported to OBJ. That's just one of the problems of working in a mixed pipeline, and studios know this, professionals know this, but there's really no format that works perfect. Anytime you take an asset out of a 3D program and then save it out to some kind of external file and bring it back in, whether it's OBJ, FBX, or anything like that, it's never going to work exactly perfect. Sometimes you'll run into weird quirks or strange bugs. Your UV mapping might be off, materials, in this case geometry, because of the OBJ format, is just not exactly perfect, even though it's one of the preferred formats that's used out there. So this kind of thing happens. When it happens, we have to know how to fix it. So that's why I'm showing you this part of the tutorial, so that you learn how to fix this kind of problem, because chances are you will run into situations like this when you're exporting and importing stuff back and forth, whether it's in 3ds Max or whether you're working with multiple programs like Max and Maya or Maya and Softimage, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and fix this. With all these elements selected and just these logos here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to geometry, I'm going to detach this and make it a new object, and I won't make it a clone. So now this is a new object, and you can see the geometry is really messed up. And if I go ahead and I render this out, you can see it's horrible, it's destroyed. That's no problem. I'll select all the polygons. I'm going to go down and I'm going to hit an auto smooth. That's going to help to fix it up a bit. If I render this out again, you notice that helped a little bit, but it still doesn't look very good. We have these polygons here that are messed up. So if all the polygons selected, we'll go to triangulation, retriangulate. Everything looks good except for the O. The O is messed up, so let's go ahead and fix the O. Let's take the polygon that's here in the middle, delete it. It's got some polygons here that just didn't come through correctly when we imported. Okay, there's still some polygons left right there, but they're a part of the TV mesh. So I'll select the HD TV. I'm going to go to element mode and select these polygons carefully and delete them. And once they're gone, I can then just go ahead and finish this up. So I'll select the little Sony logo here. And you notice that it's a different color. Let me just change the color so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to go to border selection mode. I'm going to select the border right there and the border on the inside. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the graphite modeling tools, the border edges. And I'm going to hit bridge. And that's going to go ahead and seal up that area for me automatically. And if I render this out, you'll notice that now it's rendering out correctly. This is good. Okay. So because we created a logo also for the Blu-ray player over here, chances are you've probably guessed it, the Sony logo on the Blu-ray player also got messed up. And it did. So again, I'm going to detach into a new object. I'm going to select it, change the color to make it a little bit easier to see here. Then I'm going to select all the polygons. I'm going to go down and hit an auto smooth. So it's pretty easy once you know the steps, once you know exactly what to do and how to fix this. It's not really that much of a problem. So I'm going to take this polygon, delete it, take that polygon, delete it. Again, the Blu-ray mesh has some problems here. So I'm going to select that little piece of geometry there. Delete those. Be careful not to delete any geometry on the main mesh, the good geometry of the Blu-ray player. Okay. I'm going to go to border selection mode and select these two borders and bridge that. So that problem is solved. So it's very important to know how to solve problems like this as they come, because if you're working in 3D at a professional level, you will run into problems like this all the time. This kind of stuff is actually quite normal. Okay. It doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen. Alright, so the next thing here is this clock. This clock right now is a closed container, so I'm going to be suspicious about that, and I'm going to show you what's going to happen, but not right now. I'll show you when it does happen. What I'm going to do at the moment is I'm going to go ahead and assume that all my geometry is good. I should probably take a moment to scan everything real quick with my eyes and make sure that there's no more problems like what we saw with the Sony logo, but I'll go ahead and leave that for you to scan the scene and check it out on your own time. I'm going to say that everything is good, and if I do find anything that's messed up, I'll fix it. Okay, so assuming everything is good to go, let's actually go ahead and create our ambient occlusion shader, and that's the bonus part of this tutorial. I'm going to hit M on the keyboard, M for material, to open up the material editor. Okay, so the material editor is just a window where you can create materials and shaders for your scene. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the first material here on the top left slot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to a mentorate material. How do I do that? There's a button here that says standard. Okay, click on that button and the material map browser window opens up, and what you want to do is select the arch and design material that's up here on the top of the list. That's the architectural material from Mental Ray. It's very, very good. I strongly recommend using it whenever you get a chance. Okay. We also have a drop-down list up here of different templates we can use. So you can choose things like rubber, leather, masonry, glossy finishes, pearl finish. We want to choose a matte finish, which is just an ideal diffuse shading model. Okay. Now with that done, I have the material here, but it's not applied to anything in my scene just yet. So what I need to do is select everything in my scene that I want to have the material, and simply hit this button here with a little green cube. That's the assign material to selection button. And once I do that, everything turns gray because that's the color of this material. Alright? If I come into my scene here, let me just deselect everything, and I render this out now, everything's going to render out great. Except, of course, for the clock, which is in the container. Because the container is closed, it's sealed off, it won't allow me to apply shader to the objects that are inside. So we're going to fix that right now. Okay? That's why I said I was suspicious of the container, because I knew that the container wasn't going to let me do that. So what I'm going to do is close the material editor. I'm going to select the container and hit the Make All Content Unique button here in the Modify tab. And that's going to pop the container open. Now what I can do is simply select everything inside the container, which is all the clock pieces. Hit M to open up the material editor again. With that material selected, I'll hit the little green cube button to assign the material, and voila, there you go. Now if I render this out, you'll notice that the clock is completely gray. This doesn't look very pretty. It looks pretty nasty actually. So we're not even done with this yet. Okay. What we can do with this material here is we can use ambient occlusion. I'm going to use it in a way that's different than how most people use this shader. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down here to Special Effects Rollout, and we have an Ambient Occlusion parameter. Simple enough, right? Turn that on, and what? We're going to get Ambient Occlusion to work? Well, if we render this out, it's not working. Okay, so let me show you how to do a little trick here to get this to work in a specific way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the ambient occlusion to not use a custom ambient light. I'm going to tell it to use the global ambient light color, which right now just happens to be black. So if I render this out, you'll notice that very little difference, if any. What I need to do is go up to the rendering menu. I'll go to the environment button here. 8 on the keyboard is the shortcut. And you notice we have an ambient color here. Right now it's set to black by default. I'm going to turn that up all the way to white. And if I render this out again, everything now renders out white, but it still doesn't look very good. It still looks pretty nasty. Only now it's white instead of gray. So let me close that. So how can we fix this? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the main material parameters. I'm going to go to the diffuse parameters here. I'm going to go to the color, and next to the color is a little square button right here that's empty. If we click on that button, it opens up the material map browser. What we want to do is select the first one here in the list called the Ambient Reflective Occlusion. We're going to click on that shader and we're going to bring that in. And now if we render this out again, it's going to render out completely black, which is obviously no good. So the reason it's rendering out black is because of our max distance. Right now it's set to 0. When you're doing an interior scene, if you're using ambient occlusion, you can't use a distance that's set to 0 because everything's just going to come out really, really dark, and in many cases pure black. So what I need to do is give it a number, a max distance. So I'm going to give it about 20 feet. And when I do that, if I render again, now we can actually start to see the ambient occlusion effect taking effect in our scene. Okay? But right now it's completely blown out. Everything is super white. You can see stuff better, but it's too blown out. Why is that happening? The reason that's happening is because by default, 3ds Max creates a couple of default lights in your scene. Every time you start a scene with 3ds Max, if there are no lights in your scene, 3ds Max says, well, let me place some automatic lighting for you, buddy. You don't want it to do that, though, because in this case, it's actually hurting our scene. So how do we tell 3ds Max to, no thanks, keep the lighting to yourself, I'll take care of lighting on my own? The way we tell it to do that is by creating a light in our scene. See, when we create a light in our scene, that tells 3ds Max, there's a light in the scene, please shut off the default lighting. So I'll go to the Create tab over here, and I'm going to go to the little light button right there. I'm going to switch to Standard here in the drop-down list. I'm just going to create an Omni light and just place it anywhere in our scene like so. Now I'm going to go to its Modify tab here, and I'm going to go down to the Intensity and Color Attenuation parameters and take the multiplier and place that at 0. Essentially, what that does, it turns the light off. Now if I go back in my scene and I render this out again, I should get a totally different result, and you can see that I do. The main difference here is the only thing that's creating lighting in the scene right now is the ambient occlusion material. There's no lights, there's no default lighting, there's none of that stuff. Nothing is influencing the lighting in our scene except for the ambient occlusion, which is what I wanted. So this gives us that nice clay render type effect, this nice ambient occlusion type render. And the beauty of it is, we zoom in here to stuff, what it does is that objects that are close to each other, or surfaces I should say that are close to each other, renders out darker. Areas that are more exposed to open area with nothing occluding it, nothing blocking its view, and ends up rendering out lighter. So it ends up creating a very nice type render that makes it easy to see details in the model. So this is very good for when you have to evaluate a model and you don't want a texture, you don't want lighting or shadows or anything like that to really influence the way that you see the model. So this is very good just for seeing the core essentials of a model and determining, does the model look good or not? And if it looks good with the ambient occlusion shader like this, then it's going to look great once you add textures to it, once you create some nice lighting with mental rays, so on and so forth. Okay? So there you go. That's an ambient occlusion render. Now there's still a few more things we want to do with this because we're not quite done. Here, I'm going to show you how to get around a couple of pitfalls with this. Okay? If I come over here to this picture frame and I render this out, you're going to notice something kind of weird. Editor, edit that out of the video. You messed up. Start again in 3, 2, 1. So you can see how the ambient occlusion shader is just great. Now if I come over here and I zoom in to say this corner over here and I render this out, you're going to notice, or maybe you might not notice, it's a little bit hard to notice, but if you pay attention and I point it out, you will notice it. You notice that all the edges of all my objects here are very hard, very sharp. That's not good because it doesn't look very realistic, doesn't look very nice, okay? No edges in your 3D models should look razor sharp unless if you're purposely making some type of a blade or sharp instrument or knife, sword, something like that. If you're doing the corners of a piece of furniture, it shouldn't be razor sharp because that doesn't make any sense. That just doesn't exist in the real world. So how do we fix that? If we go back to the material, hit M on the keyboard to open up the material editor over here. Okay, now right now we're looking at the ambient occlusion material here. What we need to do is go back to the mental ray material. To do that easily, right next to this yellow button, go to this parent button. It's the go to parent button. It has a little arrow that points up. Click on that. That takes you back up to the mental ray shader. Okay, what I want to do here is go back down to the special effects rollout where I turn on ambient occlusion. I want to turn on the round corners feature. When I do that, watch what happens. Let me do another render. If you look at the corners are softer now, which looks much more realistic because in real life, no corner is razor sharp, again, unless it's the edge of a knife or a razor, something sharp. But on a piece of furniture, the edges are going to be like this. They're going to have a little bit of softness to them. That's just the way that things are in the real world, okay? I'm going to reduce the amount of that softness to about 0.1 because right now it looks like it's a little bit too soft. Let me re-render this. So that parameter right there, that 0.1 controls how soft or hard the edges look, how soft or how sharp they look. Okay, so I'm going to go for about 0.1, which is nice and subtle and looks pretty good. Alright, let's come over here to the picture frame and let's render this out. I want to see if I could catch something here and point it out to you, which is very important. And you can't really see it here in this render right here. So here's what I'm going to do. Let me close that. Let me come up to maybe these books over here. Okay, immediately you see that there's a problem here. Something is terribly wrong. If you look at the bottom of the books where they meet up with the surface of the shelf, it looks almost like if the books melted into the shelf and became a part of it. That's not good. You don't want that. That's a serious problem. The reason that's happening is because everything in the scene is sharing the same exact material that has the round corners feature turned on. So the shader is accidentally thinking that all the objects should look like they're part of the same object, which is not what we want. So what we need to do is apply a different material to those objects so that they get split apart and separated, so to speak. So how do we do that? We have to create another shader just like this one, okay, another copy, and apply it to the objects that we want to look separate. So the way we can do that quick and easy is just click and drag this shader to another slot and it'll copy it over, okay? And that's very simple after that. I'm going to hit H on the keyboard to open up the select from scene dialog here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the word book. And that's automatically going to select all the items with the word book in the name. I'll hit OK. So all the books. I also want to take all the picture frames. Okay. I want to take maybe the TV as well. And let me see. I'm going to take all this stuff. I'm going to take the coffee tables as well. And the picture frames that are on the walls, I'm going to select those as well. So basically you want to select any objects that need to look like they're separated from the rest of the house and just apply this new material to those objects. Now when you do that, since I made a copy of the material, it copied the same name. 3ds Max doesn't like that, so I'm going to hit rename material. I'm just going to type in a random text for name very quickly just to solve that problem easily. Okay, these dining chairs and the table, I'm also going to do the same thing. So I'll apply the new material. So let me come over here to some of these books. And let me show you what happened. Let's render that out again. And now the books should look like they're separated from the shelf. It shouldn't look like they're melted into the shelf. And when it finishes rendering out, you can start to see, there we go, the problem has been solved. We no longer have that weird candle wax melting problem with the objects. So I'm going to fast forward the video. What you want to do is select any objects in your scene that need to be separated and apply the new material to those objects. So it's going to be things like the moldings down here on the floor, the moldings by the ceiling, the light switches, all that stuff. Select it all and apply the new shader. Okay, once you did that, it's a simple matter here of just rendering this out. The problem is solved. Okay, if we render this out, just to test this out real quick, make sure everything looks good. If I spot anything, I'll fix it. If not, I'm going to say this is good to go. Okay, looks pretty good. Alright, so last but not least, you see we have this artifacting problem here with the shader. We have all these little speckles. Looks almost like there's dust on the film of the camera that we're rendering out with. To get rid of that, all we need to do is increase the samples of the ambient occlusion shader parameter. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We need to go to both shaders, okay? And let's go back to the main material parameters. Click on the little M right there next to the color to go to the ambient occlusion parameters. Take the samples, which right now is set very low to 16, and increase that to something like 128. I like to use numbers that are power of 2. You don't have to in this case, but I've been conditioned mentally because I work so much with computers to always think in powers of 2. So I tend to use powers of 2 all the time when I'm rendering with mental ray. Okay, so I'm going to use 128, which is going to look better. Keynote to make: the more samples you use, the longer the render time. The less samples you use, the quicker the render time, but the worse quality you're going to have. So keep that in mind. So I'll go to the other material. I'll go to its ambient occlusion material here, put 128 samples. Now if I render this out, render is going to be slower, but the quality is going to be higher. Okay, so you can start to clearly see that most of that artifacting is gone. Okay, and if you have any artifacting you don't like, you can go ahead and continue to increase the samples until you get something that looks acceptable to you and looks good. Just keep in mind that the rendering time is going to get slower and slower as you increase the samples. Alright, so that's going to do it for Volume 2 of Production Instruction with 3ds Max 2010. We covered a lot of things. We covered how to do a lot of hard surface modeling, things like wood and plastics and metals and things like that. So with that said, I'd like to thank you for supporting i3 Tutorials and participating in this second volume of our production instruction series of 3ds Max 2010. Thanks from myself and from everyone here at i3 Tutorials. We'd like to thank you for just coming along and being a part of this. So I'd also like to let you know that Volume 3 is right around the corner. We'll be releasing that very soon. And that one is going to cover more advanced modeling. We're going to cover more organic things. In this volume, we covered a lot of hard surfaces, again, things like wood and stuff like that. In the next volume, we're going to cover high-res objects. We're going to focus on sub-D modeling, how to use Turbo Smooth and 3ds Max to your advantage, how to do more high-res detailed objects, and how to focus more on organic things, things like cushions and cloth, and things that are more organic and a little more complex and harder to do, and not so straightforward like doing, say, the furniture and the electronics and things that we did in this volume, okay? So it's going to be a lot of fun, it's going to be great, and there's going to be a lot of stuff to cover in that Volume 3, and that'll be coming out real soon. I hope you can join us for Volume 3 and you come back for more training. Thanks a lot from everyone here again. If you have any questions or comments, just drop by our forums and let us know what you think. Give us any suggestions or just give us a shout out. So thanks a lot and take care.